Thank you for joining us today. Today, in this episode, we're going to be going into the wonderful, strange world of the Mabinogi. As a cure for your generic fantasy, there's a lot of things from the Mabinogi, or the Mabinogian, as it's also known. So, what if the key to saving your kingdom wasn't a magical sword, but maybe it was a cosmic game of badger chess? Or what if your hero had to punish himself for a crime that he didn't commit to uphold his honor? The Welsh myths of the Mabinogi are some of the most bizarre and beautiful stories ever written, and they are a gold mine for writers that are looking to get out of the same old, same old. Now, this video is going to be for writers whose magic systems maybe feel a little bit too much like a video game, or you're wanting to get out of the traditional fantasy copy and paste. The Mabinogi, offers a lot that allows you to be truly enchanting and unpredictable. Writing a fantasy story, you've got your magical system all worked out. It's got spell slots and mana. It's all very logical. Your hero can cast a level 3 fireball spell, and some cantrips, maybe some defensive spells, but only if he's had a long rest and his wizarding guild dues are all paid up. It's great. It's fine. It's just maybe you've seen it before. What if I told you there's a place where magic is a little weirder, a little more dangerous, and maybe a little more interesting? It's a place where a wizard's life might depend on his feet being in a virgin's lap. I'm not making that up. That's really in the story. Math the Mage. What if you go accidentally wandering into the underworld during a hunting party and you have to trade places with the King of the Fae for a year? Then welcome, fellow storytellers, to the Mabinogian, the collection of Welsh myths that is the ultimate cure for generic fantasy. Today we're going to be doing a dive into its bizarre and beautiful world and learn how to make our own magic stories a little more magical. This is lore that you need to steal. The story starts with Quill, Prince of Dyfed, a name that I assure you is a little easier to read than it is pronounced. Quill was a good lord, but he's a bit of a lad. One day he's out hunting. His hounds corner a magnificent stag. They've been hunting it for a long time. He's almost got it cornered. And then this other group of hounds, white flesh, ears that are stained blood red, they come out of the forest and go to, tackle down the stag that he's been hunting all this time. Now, a lot of other sensible people, clearly seeing these strange nega wolves from the ghost dimension might think, perhaps we might want to pass on this one. But not Quill. He will not be so easily dissuaded. He chases off the ghost hound, starts butchering the stag for himself, and then the hound's owner shows up. A tall, noble, gray-clad figure who introduces himself as Aeon, the king of Anfuin, or Aeon, or Anavin. It's pronounced a few different ways. I'm probably wrong. So go with, if you've got a Welsh person or some sort of scholar, I would go with theirs. Anyway, and now Quill is realizing that he's committed a big faux pas in stealing another king's kill, and he asks how he can make it up to him. Now, Aeon, the king of Anavin, or Aeon, that's the Welsh underworld, or otherworld, we'll get to that. He makes him an offer. It's simple, really. Aeon has a rival, a guy named Halfgan, who needs good butt whooping. Problem is, fate, or magic, or for some celestial reason, Aeon can't do it himself. So the offer is this. Quill will go to Aeon for a year and a day, but not as himself, using a bit of otherworldly magic. He is given Aeon's exact face and form, and he will rule Aeon and hang out with Aeon's beautiful wife. And at the end of the year, he'll fight Halfgan. Meanwhile, Aeon will take Quill's place and go rule Dyfed. Now, it's kind of like, the ultimate witness exchange program. Quill, to his credit, he agrees. In what's the most important rule about this arrangement? When he finally faces Halfgan, he must strike him with one blow and one blow only. Halfgan has this ability to where if he's hit a second time, he magically heals and regenerates, and then you've got to fight him all over again. And hope you win that second time. So Quill spends a year in the otherworld. He rules justly, he feasts, and another show of honor. He does go to bed each night with Aeon's wife, but he turns his back to her. He doesn't lay a finger on her the entire time. He's a perfect gentleman, even while wearing another man's face. And if you're familiar with any other legends that have something similar to this, you know that's not the way this usually goes. So the year ends. Quill meets Halfgan on the field of battle, and with one mighty blow, mortally wounds him. Now Halfgan is bleeding out, and he's calling to Quill, just finish it off, finish the job. You've seen that scene, and Quill's like, no. He remembers, the warning that Aeron gave him, and he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. That's going to be somebody else's problem. Sheathes his sword, walks away. Halfgan bleeds out and dies because nobody's taking the, magical second hit that will restore him. Now he meets back up with the real Aeron. They swap faces and kingdoms back, and Aeron is so impressed with Quill's honor, both in battle and in the bedroom, that they become best friends for life. No fireballs, no spell slots, just, strange bargains, unbreakable rules, and a friendship forged because one guy didn't sleep with the other guy's wife. That's where we can find our lessons. Now, I would like to take a little segue here real quick for a couple of different ways that you can apply this tale. Now, I would say the most famous example is going to be Prince and the Pauper, where two twins, whether they just happen to look alike or they're separated at birth, it varies, but the Prince and the Pauper, one's poor, one's rich, they switch and they get to see each other's lives and how different and how, each one kind of has their own challenges. That one might not have aged very well, but, it's still out there. Then you've got the Parent Trap, the one from 61 and 98. So you got that as another concept. Then there was an odd crime drama in the late 90s, early 2000s called Face Off with John Travolta and Nicolas Cage. Now, John Travolta is the straight as an arrow, righteous federal agent, out to bust the bad guys and fight crime. And in fact, his name is Sean Archer, so straight as an arrow. And then you've got Nicolas Cage, who his character Castor Troy is like the Lord of the Underworld. So to find out, information about the Underworld and this big awful thing that they've got planned, they actually switch faces. And Sean Archer, the knight, literally goes into the Underworld. Now, it's the criminal Underworld in this example, but it's another way that you can take this same concept and, turn it 90 degrees and see what happens. Put it in a different setting. But that's just giving you a couple of different ways that you can steal this lore. Now, the story of Face Off is very different contextually than the story of Quill and Aeron, but clearly borrows from the same source. Are there any other ways that you could incorporate this plot? Maybe you have two rival politicians that find their bodies swapped magically one day. Maybe some magical force switches the faces of your hero and your antagonist, and they are forced to live out each other's lives. How do they deal with this situation? What are the things that they learn about each other? What are the things that they learn about each other's lives? Maybe there's some sort of thematic lesson that they learn from going through that. And theme is very important, and I'll try to come back to that in a little bit. So the next part that I would like to get into is the concept of soft magic. Now, I feel like this term really got coined by Brandon Sanderson, the whole concept of hard magic and soft magic. Tolkien magic was soft. Magic was kind of ethereal. You weren't completely sure what it could do. But I felt like it was a little more magical. I feel like there's room for codified magic. I definitely believe that. Do I think it's superior to more ethereal magic, to magic that you're not sure what it's going to do or how it can work? No, I believe that there's room for both, and I think seeing more soft magic in stories could lend a lot of interesting layers and context to it. So let's go back to the Mabinogian. Just because it's soft doesn't mean it's weak. It just means that the rules are more thematic and more mysterious. It's not science-based. It's not like X always equals Y. Modern hard magic, a little more, coded. A and B will get you C. Soft magic can be more like making a deal with a force of nature, and it's built on principles. So in this case, you've got the principle of reciprocity. Aeron doesn't curse Quill for stealing his hunt. He offers a way to balance scales. The whole story is an exchange of favors. When you build your magic system, think about this. Don't just have good and evil. Have magic that requires balance. So you get a magical gift, maybe you have to give one, or give something important to you that you have to give up. to lift a curse. Maybe there's an act of service. Maybe there's a sacrifice that has to be made. And it makes the magic feel like a living part of that world's ecosystem. Second, and also very important, is the principle of an oath or a geas. The single most powerful force in the story is Quill's promise to only strike Halfgan once. It's an arbitrary rule, but in this world, it has more power than any sword. Breaking it would have undone everything that Quill had accomplished, and Halfgan might have won because he'd be completely refreshed and healed. Now we see this again later on in Mabinogi. There's a great magician, Gideon, great name, that is trying to get weapons and a name for his illegitimate son. Lou Gifes, but Lou's mother, Arianrod, had sworn an oath that he would never get either. So Gideon has to go through these series of deceptions to get her to give him a name and to give him armor. Because the enchantment that she placed on him, he couldn't get them otherwise unless they came from her. The magic of the oath is absolute in this world, and it can't be broken, but it can be maneuvered around. And that's where you get to play with the creativity of yourself and of your characters. Now, giving your magic, strange specific rules, a knight who is, fated to die if he ever refuses a quest for help, a sword that can't be drawn unless the wielder, speaks a magical word, a sorcerer who maybe can't cross running water. You do have monsters that can't cross running water in old folklore. These limitations are thematic, and they should play into the story, but it's also a lot more, I feel like it makes it more interesting than, a hero that just can't cast a spell because his mana is running low. It's a force of creativity, and it can also reveal a lot of character within the story. And let's go a little bit more into theme. So deeds of great warriors, trickery, deception, facing off against opponents to help out a comrade. These are tales that fit within the cultural perspective in which they were told. This is important to keep in mind as you are building your story in your world. What are the cultural mores of your world? How do the deeds of your characters enforce or run counter to that? What are maybe some personal values of yours? Now, I'm not saying preach from the page. That's always a terrible idea. It doesn't usually go well. But, for example, let's say you have a thing against throwing away something that could still have use. All right, put that into the story. Have there be an item that one of the characters is like harassed to get rid of. It's like, no, I'm going to need this one day. I'm going to hold on to it. And maybe another character throws away an item because they're like, I don't need this anymore. And then she ends up in a really bad spot later on in the story where she really could have needed that item. That's just one example of how to take a personal moray or a cultural moray and kind of put it into the story. Now, the next thing that I really want to delve into in this one is the concept of the other world, Aeon. Now, it's not just some ghostly spirit plane. It is a physical place that exists parallel to our own, and the veil between them is just thin sometimes. You can get there by chasing an animal, wandering into a strange mist, maybe sailing too far out to sea where there be dragons. In the second branch of the Mabinogi, the Irish king Matholwch has a cauldron that can bring dead warriors back to life. He got it from a giant that emerged from a lake in Ireland. The magical and the mundane can live side by side here. Now, there's also something else I wanted to include here. There's a great, outside the Mabinogi, there's a poem from the Book of Taliesin called The Spoils of Aeon. It describes King Arthur and his knights, which I'll be talking about King Arthur in another video, him and his knights sailing into the other world to steal that very cauldron. It describes a land with glass castles and strange inhabitants, but it's a place you can physically jump in a boat and go to. It's also kind of odd to me because it's literally Arthur running a military raid on the Fey realm, which seems like not a great idea, but I'll leave that story for another time. So, takeaway here, when you're world building, you don't just want to create if you don't want to just create a separate spirit realm, you could create a tangible other world. Where are its borders? Maybe it's at crossroads. Maybe it's at fairy circles, if you're familiar with those, the rings of mushrooms. Maybe it's once you get so deep into a glade, into the forest, you find yourself there. What happens if you eat the food? Are you now bound to the area like Persephone? Or do certain rites of hospitality come into play, in which case it's a major faux pas to not eat the food there? Maybe the rite of hospitality showcases the difference between the nightly world and the Fey world. And now that becomes something that shows the polarization between the two places and how different they are. What are some cultural opposites that you can carve out for your tale? Now, pondering these questions and really digging deeper into them will make your world feel deeper, more mysterious, and for all of that, more real. It allows for some incredible stories of mortals who wander across the border and for good or ill come back changed. So next time you're outlining a story, maybe put away the core rule book and the supplemental guides for a moment. Ask yourself, what if the magic was based on promises? What if the fairy kingdom was just a short walk through the woods away? Let your world get a little bit weird. Let's run it on the logic of a dream, because the Mabinogian teaches us that's where the real magic is hiding. There's a lot more to the Mabinogi than just these stories. There's the story of Math the Mage, who I mentioned earlier, that had to keep his feet resting on the lap of a virgin. That story takes an odd and very dark turn, which I won't completely delve into in this story or in this video. There's a story about a young lad that is cursed by his mother. We went through that. That he has to trick his mom to get a name and to be able to wield weapons. There's a group of heroes who awake to find that their kingdom is missing and that they're in some other land. But they are just so awesome that they keep... This is really how the story plays out. They're so awesome. They're so great at everything that they do that they become craftspeople in each town. But they're so good at it that they take all the business away from the other craftspeople and get run out of town for it. And I could just see some sort of sitcom where somebody at craft festivals keeps getting chased from craft festival to craft festival, and maybe is sponsored by Etsy. I don't know. Now, the Mabinogian isn't like other mythologies, although I would argue that each mythology is separate and distinct. It's less about epic battles and more about the strange, dreamlike logic of the other world. Magic is weird, it's morally ambiguous, and often relies on cleverness and honor rather than brute force. So it's a solid antidote for generic fantasy. So let's recap. Tangible otherworld. In modern fantasy, the fairy realm is often a distant, separate place. In the Mabinogian, it's right next door. You can wander into it by accident, chasing a deer. It's king can trade places with a human prince for a year and a day. Lots of fun stuff there. And you can create a thin veil between your worlds. I've seen this done with the ghost world, where the ghost world is kind of like right next to ours. You've got, this isn't necessarily as, this is a little more conceptual, but vampires, or supernatural creatures that hide their existence living amongst mortals, in which case there is an underworld of sorts that lives side by side with ours, and you come into it accidentally, but it's not necessarily like a magical other place. So figure out ways that you can create a thin veil between worlds in your own story. Maybe it's a thin level between the main characters in the Illuminati, or the secret world of vampires, or whatever elves are up to, or maybe it is a Fey world, or a ghost world. But having this sort of parallel other world can definitely lend a lot of texture and a lot of mystery. One, as you're exploring that other world, Stranger Things would be another example of this, the Upside Down, and how it is connected to Hawkins. It is a dark parallel version of it. So you make it its own place, give it its own internal structure, and it's not just, some magical whipped cream that's put on top of the story. It's got a lot of opportunities for characters to cross over, maybe make bargains, and maybe bring strange troubles back with them. Mabinogian is often wondrous and often left unexplained. It creates unbreakable principles of honor, oaths, and reciprocity. You don't just cast a spell, you enter into a binding agreement with another entity. A magical curse can desolate an entire kingdom, and it can't be broken by force, only by outwitting the enchanter. Instead of creating complex scientific magical systems, perhaps you can play around with soft magic and see what happens. The cost of magic isn't necessarily mana points, but it's a personal sacrifice, a binding oath, some object of great importance, and perhaps the magic can have unforeseen consequences that twist the user's intent. The women of the Mabinogian are also a great example of complexity. Rhiannon isn't a damsel. She's a powerful otherworldly woman who chooses her own husband and is later wrongly accused of killing her child, bearing her punishment with dignity. Blodwed is a woman literally created from flowers to be the perfect wife and develops her own thoughts and ideas, takes a lover, plots to kill her husband, and is punished by being turned into an owl. Use these figures, in your story. Use the archetypes. Create characters with conflicting desires, conflicting societal roles, maybe even conflicting roles for their worlds that set them at odds. A character can be created for one purpose who chooses. A character can start off with one purpose and choose something else very differently, later on in the story, which changes their personal arc, forces them out of their comfort zone, and allows you to explore not just the world that they're looking into, but also themselves. Again, theme is very important. How can these two things be connected thematically? What's the weirdest rule you've ever seen in a What's the weirdest rule you've ever seen in a magic system or in a story? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to learn more about architecture of ancient stories, make sure to like and subscribe for more lore you can steal. And go tell some wonderfully strange tales.